Hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Bex. I'm the events coordinator here at Books Are Magic. And we are so excited to have Sophie and Grace Byron here tonight to celebrate Anti-Feminisms. I just have a few housekeeping notes to go over before we get started. At the end, we'll be doing a hand-raised Q&A, so think of your questions, go on them type, we'll get them answered. Afterwards, Sophie will be signing near where you checked in to personalize. So we'll tell you what to do when it's time for that. If you're joining us in the live stream, we'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of Feminisms in the link in the live stream description. So you all read the Eventbrite supposedly and know what this book is about. So instead of reading from that, I'm going to read from my shelf talker because I love this book a lot. And if you haven't already bought a book, you should get it because we got them. And I love to reorder them. So this is about Anti-Feminisms. Feminism, like any ideology, contains the same multitudes as the people who purported parentheses derogatory. In this sharp and erudite history, Lewis moves a spotlight across a variance of feminism, from the temperance movement to girl bosses to TERFs to the KKK, in order to better understand how these are not aberrations of politics, but reckonings. Only once we get to the root of abolition, which is the root of feminism and anti-racism and anti-fascism, will we be able to recreate a world where the possibility of these dividing multitudes is instead the possibility of kaleidoscopes and fractals, a life not determined by harm, but by shining emergent light. Star of tonight's show, Sophie Lewis, as an ex-academic writer based in Philadelphia, whose writing has appeared everywhere from N+1 to Lennon Review of Books. She is the author of 2 works published by Verso, one of which, Abolish the Family, we also have here for you tonight to purchase. And you can support her on Patreon. Grace Byron, conversation extraordinaire, friend of the store, is a writer from Midwest based in Queens, whose writing has appeared in The Cut, Vogue, LARB, The Baffler, Bookform, and elsewhere. Her debut novel, Herculean, very exciting, learned of this while I was copying and pasting the bio, is forthcoming from Saga Press in October. I also checked our system. You can totally pre-order it now.
And you should. You should.
So without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to Sophie and Grace.
Thank you. Can I just go into it? Yeah, if I was a sadist or more of one, I would clearly have designed that title for people to say. That was good, though. That was 2 out of 3. Thanks so much for coming out. And thank you, Grace. I'm a huge fan. So this is it's really exciting. I think my previous 2 books, Full Surrogacy Now doesn't always get, you should pre-order it here. Full Surrogacy Now is the longer version of Abolish the Family, I would controversially say. Or Abolish the Family is the prequel. I think those 2 have a more obviously uplifting character. And as I was preparing for this event, or the series of events I'm in the midst of, I realized how terrible it is to talk about these things, and also to talk about them in front of rooms full of people potentially looking for some kind of guidance in a moment that, is unspeakable. It doesn't feel like promoting books is the biggest priority right now, but at the same time, the relevance is here. I would like to talk about anti-fascism tonight. This is what this book is in my mind, an anti-fascism strategy intervention. I also think it's not just glib when it says in the description that it's a love letter to feminism. It is that as well. But I suppose that throat clearing was there to recognize rather than apologize for the fact that there aren't necessarily quite as many jokes in every sentence as there were in my previous books. Every writer wants their book to be more relevant now than ever and extremely timely. But, J.K. Rowling did just celebrate the executive order defending women against gender ideology extremism in the name of radical feminism. So I've not read at an event from the conclusion before, but that's where I'm going to take us, because I think that is where I'm trying to be more, shall we say, positive. Feminism against cisness. What could Mary Wollstonecraft have said instead of woman is the N-word of the world? What did others at the time say without the access she had to a publisher? I hope this book has inspired, if nothing else, a desire to find this out. An alternative history of Western feminism might be told, beginning not with a vindication, but with Charles Fourier or Harriet Jacobs, and then proceeding from there through the maroon, communard, erotophilic, gender abolitionist strands of 19th and 20th century anti-capitalism. This history would not, of course, be remotely free of schisms, missteps, contradictions, and exclusions, but it would show a liberatory rather than anti-liberatory tradition from the milieu of Catherine Impey's anti-caste journal of the 1880s and 90s to the struggles of decolonial groups like Star in the 1970s and the internationalist feminism of the 19th century French-Peruvian socialist Flora Tristan to the Boston-based Bread and Roses collective in the 20th century, and from the red love of Bolshevik visionary Alexander Kollontai to that of third worldist family abolitionists like Pat Parker. I've taken certain forms of pleasure in writing this book, but let me tell you, I can't wait to go back to reading and disagreeing with my current and future comrades instead of my enemies. Spent too long in this book's archive, and you might start thinking that most feminism was for cisness, which is to say, for an understanding of sex as imposable upon people from the outside. Of course, enemies are sometimes family. Carol Lee, the Scarlet Harlot, loved feminism, quote, like I love my mom, unquote, even as it mostly did not love her back. Anyone familiar with Lee's writing or with the work of the groups she belonged to or founded, Coyote, Bay Swan, SWAP, USA, ACT UP, knows that she was constantly insisting that, quote, poverty forces women into survival sex and sex for money, unquote. As such, whatever Catherine McKinnon may say, we know that Lee invented the terms sex work and pornophobia from within a movement for women's liberation. Carol may, in fact, have been sisterly to a fault. In Unrepentant Whore, her memoir, Carol spends an awful lot of time almost repenting. She is generous. It is the yearning for sisterhood that makes her so quick time and again to offer to be accountable to those she may have wronged. Sisterhood is what makes her entertain so often the idea of her faction being wrong. She regrets that her fellow quote-unquote slut radicals abhor the quote-unquote pornophobes. She's talking porn in the sense of porne as in whore, the depiction of the lives of whores. For her part, I don't want to fight my sisters. Carol sits down with a former fellow prostitute turned McKinnonite. This friend has, quote, been raped and arrested more times than I can fathom, unquote. And she now works with the vice squad and the district attorney after leaving her job in the jails, where she launched the local mandatory HIV testing program for prostitutes, drawing blood from those convicted of prostitution, unquote. Carol is hurt, startled, and repelled by what her old friend is doing. Still, she forces herself to empathize. Maybe slut-positive women can seem like the enemy. Maybe we should be treated like outcasts, excluded from the family of feminists, labeled liars, unquote. Carol's so-called friend, however, does not return this favor. She looks Carol in the face and says, arresting prostitutes is the only way we can get services to them. In fact, 2 or 3 days in jail is not long enough to get a woman off drugs. There must be a way to keep them in jail for longer. To top it all off, she tells Carol, If you make it any easier for women to slip into prostitution, you'll have blood on your hands. Blood on my hands, Carol thinks, biting her tongue. Nonetheless, she holds out valiantly for, quote, a new feminist revelation based on a union of the good girls and the sluts, unquote, a sisterhood of my whore friends and those currently working to jail them for their own good. With apologies to Carol, I believe this level of optimism and kindness has been imprudent for left feminism. I agree with the anarchists Michael Richmond and Alex Charnley when they argue in their essay Fascism and the Women's Cause that feminism has been one of fascism's forms of appearance and must, in such cases, be fought accordingly. This is why I cannot rejoice when Mackinnon publishes in 2023 a feminist defense of transgender sex equality rights, predicated as ever on a version of sex that unwomans sex workers. In the slim, lacerating volume, Morbid Obsessions, the British fiction writer Alison Rumfitt mulls the question of points of no return and lines of enmity that have to be drawn, painful though this is, between whorephobic feminists and feminist whores, anti-trans feminists and trans feminists. Without realizing it, she writes, gender-critical discourse shares much with trans arguments. Quote, a lot of TERFs talk at length about not feeling like women, not feeling any sort of association with it as a category or role beyond their biology. But we are past the point of ever fulfilling the dream of them realizing en masse that this is exactly what trans people often feel, unquote. In a similar vein, Rumfitt's interlocutor, the sex worker liberationist Frankie Miran, muses that, quote, it's hard not to be morbidly obsessed with the people who hate you, especially when they're so visible and relentless. For example, how can one not fixate on the logic in play when, in 1983, the sex worker activist Margot St. James sought to debate Kathleen Barry, the author of Female Sexual Slavery? At one of the first ever anti-trafficking conferences, Barry refused, saying that it would be, quote, inappropriate to discuss sexual slavery with prostitute women, unquote. Presumably, the appropriate experts and, more important, victims are the good and normal, unused women who aren't enslaved by monetized sexuality. Barry went on to co-found the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, which introduced the vague sense of sexual exploitation, quote unquote, into UN and US policy, such that trafficking is now widely taken to mean all monetized sex. Says Miran of mega swerfs, sex worker exclusionary radical feminists, like Barry, quote, I've spent a lot of time wondering how you end up in that place, unquote. So have I. But as we both know, our empathy and curiosity must not stop us from mobilizing to protect ourselves and each other. I'll leave it there.
Well, first of all, is it on?
I think so.
Yeah, it's on. Okay. Well, first of all, your book is very funny.
Oh.
I had a whole section of one-liners in a piece I'm writing about it that they said you have to take this out. This has no real purpose. And I was like, it is. It's a funny book. And I do think that, while perhaps there are parts of it that are grim, you have a lot of jokes and a lot of people that you're sort of, calling into account, which can be its own form of humor.
Thank you. Yeah, I was remembering that my editor is in the room and she says I should not do that self-deprecation thing.
Fair. I'll do it. So I guess maybe for people who haven't read the book yet, just sort of a gloss of what enemy feminisms, I can't do it either.
Is. Right, enemy feminisms, or as I was originally going to call them, the feminisms of fools, by analogy to the socialism of fools, which is a truncated anti-materialism, truncated anti-capitalism, excuse me, that was, a term that they came up with on the left in Germany in the late 19th century to distinguish common or garden anti-Semitism, Christian, right-wing, from this new form that was purporting to be left-wing, a sort of producerism, a sort of like something that has a systemic impulse, like, yeah, something's bad with capitalism, but instead of getting their mind around the totality, which indeed is extremely hard, that they sort of take this fatal wrong turn. They respond to a sort of seduction to think about the matter as a question of possible unity between classes. So bosses and workers don't have to have class struggle. They can just be sort of unified one day into an organic whole via the purgation, the purging of this thing, the Jew, right, which is both finance and I don't know why I'm wiggling my fingers. Finance, and yeah, well, I do know why I am actually. Yes, those are the images, aren't they? And then also, the Jew is simultaneously Bolshevism or trade unionism, and it's it's that kind of spectral force that Naomi Cohen has shown us actually is very, very, very related to the way that National Socialism also thought about the trans feminine, the trans woman, wandering, rootless in terms of gender in this case, as opposed to in terms of nation with the Jew. But the Feminism of Fools was going to be an analogy to this. I mean, it is. The scaffolding is there in the book. I just haven't called it that because it turns out lots of people don't know this phrase, and it would come across as me saying the feminism for idiots that you idiots are espousing because you're idiot fools, and it's not. That's not the way that foolish operates in that phrase, right? It's not like, oops, foolish, haha, it turned out to be a Nazi. Like, it's pretty bad, it's really, but what is useful about it is that it indicates a tragedy, that there's an impulse there, that is worth trying to identify early on and direct towards something harder, like communism, feminist communism. So basically anti-liberatory feminism is where I'm going with this. It's a not trivial mistake, right? In the same way that truncated anti-capitalism can lead you in these brown shirt directions, I think there are very serious locations that a truncated feminism can lead you to. And so I've created a sort of bestiary of 200 years worth of Western feminism that shows some of the ways that this has happened, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you also sort of are like explaining why that's such a bad thing and why it's important that these things are feminism. They're not just feminism gone astray. They're also sort of, it's important to denote them as these sort of cross-references. Why do you think it's important to say that? Like, why is it important to say, no, there's a chapter on a KKK feminist? Why is that important to not jettison out and say, actually, that person wasn't a feminist?
Right. Yeah, I mean, great. So one of the reasons I'm actually, personally committed to the C word, communism, rather than socialism, because I do actually think National Socialism has a relationship to socialism. I might make the same claim that there's a sort of that's not the way we tend to talk about it. I wouldn't say this is strategic, but I do happen to think that socialism has something to do with National Socialism. I similarly think feminism, which is not to say that the left is closer to fascists than liberals, for example. The opposite is the case. And if you get into this, you start being accused of horseshoe theory and all kinds of things. But what I think is important is understanding that historically, the things that have operated under that banner really are, these profoundly imperial, white supremacist, anti-communist kinds of formations. So if you're going, in a sense, it's a taxonomical clearing up that I'm doing because, I wanted to sit down with myself and be like, does it hold water to say, trans-exclusionary radical feminists aren't feminists, feminationalists aren't feminists, these Islamophobic or sex worker exclusionary figures, they're just not doing real feminism, which is what we tend to do, and most people do that, right? In fact, already on the internet this week, since my book came out like 3 days ago, many people are quite angry. Like, there's an anger there, like, stop it with this. This isn't real feminism. you know. And I mean,
They're saying that about your book now.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You know, because we want to not have anything to do with these Klanswomen who were, however, the only political party to come out for the Equal Rights Amendment, the most radical wing of feminism in 1923 when it was tabled, right? The only political force supporting the radical wing of feminism electorally was the KKK. If you want to say this is some kind of fluke, or you want to say that a KKK member cannot be a feminist, I'm down, and we can go that way. But then we also, I just don't think you can then have Mary Wollstonecraft in feminism. I don't think you can have Susan B. Anthony in feminism. I don't know who's left. And why would feminism be something unlike every other historical project that has not got the fingerprints of imperialism, colonialism, and capital accumulation all over it? In a sense, you know, this is a very modest intervention in the right. It shouldn't be. And perhaps it is not surprising to many, you know. In a certain way, it also feels like it's the most transgressive and taboo thing I could possibly say, right? That there's such a thing as a feminist who is really a feminist, who you have to deal with as a quote-unquote real feminist, and who you need to fight in the same ways that you would fight a fascist. And I think this is important because anti-fascism has been disarmed, confused, and attenuated in certain spaces by this you know, failure we've had to sort of sort this out. If feminism means inherently good, inherently innocent, inherently not responsible for the real villainies of the past, and if feminism can only ever, at most, be the thing that is in bed with, seduced by, duped into, complicit with, in bed with the actual baddies, then I think I would also say we're making an epistemically quite anti-feminist move of not holding women responsible for history, which indeed, you know, many do advance this as a way to go. Andrea Dworkin.
Yeah, what was the quote in the book? There's like bad women are not part of history or something.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yes, when
women aren't a part of that whole empire thing.
Yeah. The New York Times was asking me to explain in February 2019, WTF, Turf Island, why? Like, why is it so feministly transphobic in the UK? And it was only just coming over. I mean, in a sense, it's just so, God, the Cassandra role is very unsatisfying, you know. One doesn't want to just be like right too early, right? That what's the point of that? But I was explaining throughout 2017 and 2018, you know, that yes, J.K. Rowling really was, you know, likely to have blood on her hands, like if not, or already did, you know, and nobody wants to believe that. Even today, even today, actually, if you're writing this stuff, the editor will be like, "Are you mad? Are you saying that radical British feminists are somehow responsible for the anti-trans efflorescence in the US?" And I'm like, of course, the receipts are all there since 1980, at least, since Jan Raymond started consulting for the defunding of trans healthcare in the Reagan administration or whatever, and you can trace it all the way through. The language, the framing, the juice of the current anti-trans pogromistic structure in this country has entirely been enabled, like potentiated, by the influx of this brand of self-styled radical feminism.
Why was it so important to you to talk about TERFs? Like, we also, maybe first, we kind of knew each other, but we first encountered each other because I took one of your classes on TERFs.
Oh, yeah.
And Julie Bindel was apparently in it. But why is it so important for you to sort of set the book up as there is feminism against cisness and there's like cis feminists? Because that does feel like it's one of the main overarching structures in the book.
Yeah. Cisness, as the great theorist Emma Heaney explains and historicizes, is the parvenu category. Cisness is not something that feminism has somehow always had. In fact, it's a counter-revolution within feminism. And, you know, so cisness, I've already defined it in the part I read out, but it, you know, it's this material ideological arrangement that says that sex can be imposed from the outside and that bifurcates and hierarchizes us in relation to reproductive potential narrowly defined. This is the force that counter-revolutionarily captures energies in feminism and turns it into a force for empire, for capital consolidation, and for the regulation of, well, the repressive regulation of queerness. So, you know, Emma's work is fantastic for showing how the trans woman is, and the femme and the Molly is the sort of disavowed remnant of feminist revolutionary achievement in the 20th century, for example. But yeah, I mean, this is why the sort of gotcha that the right loves to try and, you know, enact today. You can't even define what a woman is. Yeah, no shit. Absolutely. Like, feminism has never needed to. Feminism has always proceeded like that, because feminism, rightly defined, you know, I mean, you know, well, no, it's not rightly defined. This is an argument I had with Emma, actually. She wanted to say, you know, and it's the same conversation. Feminism is against cisness by definition. The phrase feminism against cisness should be a redundancy, an oxymoron. My whole book actually says the opposite. It says, no, we need to make it so, right? We need to make it so. We can't rely, neither can we rely on feminism being anti-fascism. We must make it so through struggle contingently. And I think strategically it really doesn't help us. It disarms and confuses us when we see people performing fascisms under the name of feminism. And, you know, this is, yeah, the op-ed I mentioned where I tried to explain why Turf Island, and my answer is largely to do with empire. The decorated, what is it, Kathleen Stock, Order of the British Empire, Julie Bindel, and so on, they tweeted, yeah, you just said it, but yeah, women, newsflash, women didn't have anything to do with that whole empire thing. And, you know, I suppose this also tells us something about the limits of, like, providing receipts, right? We know this from our conversations about conspirituality or conspiracism on the left. Information and reason is not the only thing. It's not going to do it, is it? I mean, how many books have we got? How many academic fields have we got now dedicated to proving? I mean, the evidence really is in women participated feministly in the imposition of sexual hygiene in the colonies, in the development of eugenics, in the dispossession of indigenous people, in, you know, and on and on and on. So, you know, the fact we need to do something else. There needs to be a sort of eros to the movement that wrests feminism back from this disavowed fascistic past.
I think something that you do really well in the book too is you really are defining what is a Zionist feminism, what is a transphobe versus a TERF. Like, right, I think like all of these things have to be sort of taxonomized so that you are clear when you talk. We were talking a while ago and you said the Red Scare girls are not, what was it? You were like, they're not in the same camp as what I'm talking about because they're not even claiming to be feminists, right?
Yeah.
But it's important to sort of talk about the different ways that fascism moves, which isn't to say that fascists can't be feminists, but that some fascists are feminists and some are not. And I guess I'm wondering why was it so important to you in this book also to draw out femphobia as a separate form of potentially oppression as opposed to these other ideas?
Yeah, so the echoes across the different archetypes of enemy feminism include, different things. I've already sort of mentioned the cisness through line, which I think is the closest one to the like perfect through line, right? But the
nationalism.
Yeah, I think of several of these enemy feminists as the sort of Brexiteers of feminism. You know, they're female cultural nationalists. But femphobia, as Grace just mentioned, is a really important one as well. I'm trying to articulate a counter argument, or I feel like I have been doing so. I have an essay collection coming coming out, hopefully, called Femphilia, that tries to show what I mean. But the repudiation and disgust at the self-consciously artificial feminine is what we're talking about when we say femphobic. And this is a way of understanding something quite sort of brain explosion emoji the first time you hear about it, and then actually quite intuitive subsequently, I think, which is that the originary thoughts and proposals of Western feminism are deeply, like radically misogynist, actually, and femphobic. So if you look at Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication, just what percentage of it is dedicated to the denigration of women, right? Actually existing women are just the worst. They read novels, they dress up like non-white people. You know, you can tell, like African people also like ornamentation and frippery. It's embarrassing that women in England are like this. And she's not even talking to women. She's talking to the gentlemen who are supposed to be convinced that by elevating women to a better condition, empire will ultimately be, you know, uplifted and improved. So far from being dangerous to British hegemony globally, you know, feminism is actually going to paradoxically return the Anglo-Saxon race to its primordial kind of destiny in gender equality. And she's saying, gentlemen, you know, like your wives are actually going to be much better if you let them be educated and sort of proprietarily mold the children that are the future of the nation. And it's so interesting to me, by the way, just by the by, that the inventor of the word feminism says the exact opposite about what feminism is, right? So Charles Fourier, the utopian socialist who supposedly invented the word feminism, far from a perfect guy, you know, settler utopian in a sense, or like a certainly colonialist, but you know, he's also saying feminism is the struggle of women and children against the private nuclear household. I mean, you can tell from my previous work which side of this I fall down on, but I think feminism has a schismatic kind of impossible duality internal to it, and I think that's because gender is inherently a clusterfuck of a concept. It's inherently contradictory, and the things that very sincerely get built on top of it historically to emancipate it are capable of being each other's direct antitheses and direct contradictions, right? Direct enemies.
So we talk about one of our shared contradictions, which is our feelings about Andrea Dworkin, who's a big part of this book, or at least there's a large chapter on it. I found it I was just saying this when we were talking earlier, I found it a slightly gentle chapter. Like I thought that the way that you were treating her work was fairly respectful. I don't think you really tore it apart in the way that maybe people might be expecting. And I feel the same about your essay in The Point. Which is that I thought it was a really interesting and thorough examination. But I have had people approach me when they're like, oh, are you going to write about Andrea Dworkin and reclaim her for trans people? And I always find that to be so fascinating. But in this book, you also reference Sarah Fonseca's essay, and I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about how do we take these feminists, or do we, and their contradictions, or do we need to jettison them? Because you also point out Bell Hooks was a landlord in that other essay, right?
Girl, get your money straight. No, thank you. Yeah, well, I think it does make sense to talk about Dworkin because we are in the middle of a Dworkin revival, and there was an event in Brooklyn, 2 days ago, about the reissuing of 3 of her books. I agree that there was empathy and perhaps too much softness in the essay I published, a year ago at this point, to try and intervene in this revival, try and be like, no, let's not do this. There are so many other second wave greats that we could do a revival about. You know, we could do Pat Parker, we could do Amber Hollyboy, we could do Joan Nestle, we could do, I mean, there's just, so many other choices. And I think in this moment of profound sort of pessimism and anti-utopianism and Zionism, you know, and this is the part that I left out of my earlier attempt to say, let's not do this, because it gets memory hold. I suppose I was trying to be super, super polite and put it on the terms of the conversation as it exists in the culture, as in let's leave out the Zionism. But I'm getting grumpy, Grace, and I just sat down and read the magnum opus that I'd only previously dipped into, and it's called Scapegoat, and it's Dworkin's most scholarly and longest book, and it's where she's finally decided what women should do, you know, after how many books? 10, 11 about pornography and rape, and she's really warmed up. She knows how to do, you know, 20 pages on rape at this
but
point.
But it's also so much harder to get through.
Oh, yeah.
Found.
Oh, God. Well, nobody fucking knows about this book because it's not excerpted in any of the anthologies in the revival, and it's literally just forgotten. Why is it forgotten, I wonder? Is it because she's finally, you know, she's showing us that the direction that this argument tends toward is the policy proposal, women need their own Israel with land and an army, knowing fully, and she spends a lot of time on this in the book, that Israel is a fundamentally violent project, but it is, you know, justified in the way that a woman killing her rapist is justified, is what Dworkin says ultimately. And I think in a context where we have people like how do you pronounce that? Elon Levy, the ambassador, saying that Israel is fighting a rapist regime.
Yeah.
You know, the reviving of a feminist who essentially says exactly the same thing, and whose only, you know, vision of freedom for women is modeled on the state of Israel. That's something I think we could have a second thought about, because feminism is also, you know, a very profoundly, you know, expansive and pleasure-oriented and courageous anti-fascist lineage, one that I am clearly, you know, committed enough to write this book because I give a shit, you know. I'm claimed by it. Many of my comrades actually don't have that much use for the term. I sort of think that's respectable, but I'm sort of in it, you know. I'm doing this partly because, you know, I'm a feminist, truly, you know, in my bones.
Yeah, I think your book really brings us back to what feminism means in a sort of both sidesism culture. I think that we're going to move to signing. Yes, okay.
What?
No. What?
Q&A.
Q&A, okay, great.
That went fast.
I wasn't sure which sign was which. Great, so we're doing Q&A. If anybody has a question.
Am I picking?
I think you should pick, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, the first two I saw were that gentleman and the person behind him. Yeah. So.
I wanted to just ask you to talk a little bit about differentiating, you know, as Grace mentioned and you mentioned, you know, you're empathetic but critical in dealing with this, and sort of walking the tightrope between being that and, say, like the anti-choice movement, for example, loves to rub Margaret Sanger in our faces.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you navigate that tightrope as a writer, I guess?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, I think this is the question. I think the difficult core of this book is trying to identify, or at least state as acutely as possible, the problem that we must hold on to each other and make each other not disposable, and learn how to draw lines collectively and hold them, regardless of who is on the other side of them, you know? And it's both. It's the one, they go together. You know, we talked about the taxonomizing and the sort of, clearly that's a huge, you know, I clearly am trying to convince you on some level that these figures that I'm looking at, even including the KKK feminist and the black shirt, and yes, the pro-life feminists of today, some of whom have that sort of welfarist, sort of social democratic light flavor on the Ezra Klein show, being Molly Coddle, Erika Bakioki, Bacciocchi? I think Bakioki. She's a fundamentalist Wollstonecraftian in her own estimation, and she helped put the final nail in the coffin of Roe versus Wade, because if women were respected, abortions would never happen. And I don't really care in the end if you think that's real feminism. I mean, I don't really care if you think J.K. Rowling is a real feminist on some level. I mean, I clearly care enough to have read a lot of books and decided. But what I ultimately care about is whether you thinking that they are sort of stays your hand and confuses and disorganizes your anti-fascism. Because, you could call this a question of claiming bad kin. I talk about that in the Andrea Dworkin essay, Claiming bad kin might mean, being willing to punch kin in the face. I mean, the thing about anti-fascism is you want to produce non-fascists, right? And so, yeah, we do the things that are not violent until it becomes necessary to do the things that are violent, in the hopes that it becomes economically and socially and affectively not viable, not worth it anymore, uneconomic to continue to be a fascist. And then, and so I don't really care if you understand and empathize with the pro-life feminist, maybe your friend who's been in your movement side by side with you on the streets for abortion rights has developed some really weird conspiratorial ideas lately about, she's going a bit Islamophobic or something. I'm not saying, right, that's it, slit her throat anti-fascistly. You hold on to each other. There's a lot in this book about holding on to each other, about the conversations that need to happen in movements that express hurt and repair that hurt. It's actually precisely because I don't want that kind of move to occur, that I think we need to collectively be very clear on where our lines are. The collective drawing of lines and the collective holding of that line is where I sort of end up. Because in the end, anti-fascism has often involved a sort of journalistic enterprise of going undercover in fascist movements and reporting back sort of psychological insights. I read those profiles and there's an ongoing conversation about what the point of those are and so on. I mean, I think to understand is to forgive all, unfortunately, because, it doesn't matter if you understand and forgive, you still got to punch the fascists, right? And so that's also part of it, right? You can understand your pro-life aunt and dismantle the forced birth judiciary, without hesitation. Thanks. What was the person behind?
We have one more.
I was also at your event at the New School, and there I think you mentioned something about grandmother Silvia Federici and adjacency to Turkism, and I tried to look it up and see what was going on, but I didn't really get it, and I was wondering if you wouldn't mind just explaining that story.
Oh dear.
That's in the book too, yeah? Yeah.
Oh yeah, we were supposed to repeat the questions into the mic.
Yes, we were.
I just thought that she wasn't in the index, so I assumed I had to ask.
Oh really?
But I'll just finish the book.
The question was, what was the deal with Silvia Federici being potentially a transphobe? Or transphobe adjacent, yeah.
Well, this is one of those questions where, you've shaped so much about communist feminist praxis internationally, For me, it's a huge failure of comrades and editors, because those essays in those essay collections suck in more ways than simply the transphobia. So I'm mad at the editors as well. But for me, it's about, is she going to put her body on some kind of anti-trans picket line or barricade? It doesn't seem like that. That would be that would be the decisive failure, right? But yeah, no, I think one of the things, you know, I say early on in the book something about no heroines. No, what is it?
No, you
It's
say no
some
heroines. You say no heroines.
Yeah. There might be a cutesy little formulation with no masters, no girl, you know.
That's it.
But I do think that celebrity is quite a dangerous force politically. I think it makes us stupid and it makes us cowardly. You know, the sorts of calling in and claiming bad kin that is required when someone starts after. I mean, it's a reversal of her previous politics, I would argue. I keep finding myself using people against themselves, you know, their 70s and 80s selves against their latter-day 21st century, you know, reactionary turn or mini reactionary turn. I mean, and the thing about doing a bestiary and doing the storytelling and making it individual, although Federici is not a character like that, she's a little detail, but you know, it's people are many things at once, and they contradict themselves, and they, you know, the Red Girls are not in here because they're not feminists, but also I'm sure they've said some feminist stuff at one point. You know, I'm not looking at female anti-feminism. I'm looking at right-wing or anti-liberatory feminism, which some people indeed will tell you does not exist, right? Plenty of people think that's an oxymoron, you know. But yeah, I think yeah, especially when you have heroes and queens, and you know, you have a pantheon of great comrades who have given you so much. You know, it's extremely difficult, but nonetheless necessary to say, you know, hands off our trans sisters. But as I say, that's not a material sort of commitment. It seems to me it's some very stupid, toxic questions in some essays about artificiality and what she thinks is kind of the thrall that trans people are into to the sort of capitalist industrial complex. You know, it's just warmed over Janice Raymond light, you know. But, you know, once again, we have not demanded as a feminist left that, I don't know, Andrea Dworkin actually addressed the fact that she glowingly blurbed the transsexual empire in 1979, right? So just the fact that her lifelong partner has this 2018 essay that says Andrea Dworkin was a trans ally, when his, you know, evidence for that is basically like, you know, trust me, bro. Also, she wrote something in 1974 that was pro-trans, but everything she wrote after that was entirely the reverse, right? Like, I mean, she recanted the final chapter of Woman Hating where she says that stuff about transsexuality and also bestiality and also the smashing of the incest taboo, you know, the utopian pre-Dworkin, as it were, is a very, very strange person to point to as evidence that she was in some way a trans ally. I mean, we haven't, this is the sort of lack of courage, I think, in a movement, you know. It was suggested on the panel a few days ago that she didn't live long enough to have the fight. Excuse me. She died in 2005. People were doing, you know, intra-feminist, anti-fascist defense of their trans sisters in the 60s, famously in 1973, when Robin Morgan tried to start a lynch mob against Beth Elliott at the West Coast Lesbian Conference, you know? So, yeah.
I think we now have to move into this. One more. Okay. Sophie, your pick.
See.
I am curious to hear you comment on something that I've noticed happening where there's been this move as kind of the opposite of what it sounds like you're doing, where people are saying they're reclaiming second-wave feminism, and they're saying, no, it's gotten a real bad rap, and it's actually quite good. And let me point to all of these different places. I think Andrea Dworkin is actually, you know, defending trans people is one of the things that gets marshaled. And so I'm wondering if you could just comment on why now and what work that's doing in your view.
The question is about the politics of returning to the second wave. Sorry, it was a well-phrased question.
I'm trying to
recuperate the second wave. So maybe this will surprise you, Zane, but I kind of go around with this sign that I tap when people say, not present company excluded, maybe in classrooms in particular, when people say second wave to mean ontologically oriented, racist, transphobic, so sexist, where I'm like, you don't mean that. You are stripping yourself of ancestors. You mean cultural feminist as defined by Alice Eccles in her landmark, Daring to be Bad. The counter sort of feminist, intra-feminist, counterinsurgency that prevailed circa 73, that sort of was left standing and then told the world that it was the only thing that had ever existed. Whereas if it's so heartening to read the actual 1973 Lesbian Tide, like actually read it from cover to cover, because when you've been told that this horrible, shameful, pogromistic thing happened that around a trans woman at the conference, you think, my God, second wave is an awful legacy. And then you read it and you're like, my God, that everyone is calling Robin Morgan a fascist. It was not like that. These people were a disliked minority. That's the good news, right? The bad news being that you can't disqualify them taxonomically from feminism. They come from a lineage of women's liberationism. But the good news is, and I don't want to over-egg this, but I think there was extraordinary stuff happening in the late 60s and early 70s. I'm not really into waves, but I think the way that, that era gets written off is a very peculiar psychological determination we all have. We meaning those of us who want to inherit, who want to have ancestors, who want, a bunch of erotically ambitious, utopian, queer, children's liberationist sorts of activities. Of course, it's complex because maybe some of my chosen, the people I would love to celebrate and inherit from qua feminist would have been annoyed if you'd called them, feminists. Like Emma Goldman would be annoyed if you called her a feminist. But that sort of epistemic imposition is one that I and many others do, because you read what she wrote and you're like, that's feminism, right? We don't kind of hold back from imposing that kind of label. But I think, where is the revival of the most pessimistic, femo-pessimist forms of the 80s pornophobia? Why are they being revived? I mean, I would say that regardless of the participation of some trans feminists in that revival, and regardless of the, very insipid brandishing of this Andrea Dworkin was a trans ally blog post by her partner, I think it comes from the destabilizing, complementary of the certainties of heterosexual political economy that have the groundswell, the shaking that has occurred from progress and breakthroughs in trans and queer struggles of late, and there is a desire to return to the nationalist certainties, the strong borders of a category of womanhood defined by its wounded attachment to suffering-based femaleness, and that might be operating on an unconscious level, but I think people want to go, want to get back something of the border certainty of Andrea Dworkin's version of woman.
I think that's great. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. Thank you to Sophie and Grace. Could listen to you all night. Not in this moment, but we're gonna have you line up down the center aisle. My wonderful coworkers are pointing to where Sophie will be signing momentarily. If you show up from live stream, you can buy a copy of the book and the link in the description. If you're here, you can buy it at the register with those gift cards that you all have, or your credit cards or your cash. And that's all we take. And you can also buy Abolish the Family, because these books are great and you should read them. And don't forget to pick up your belongings. We pick up those chairs as soon as you stand up. Thank you so much and have a great night.